Hello everyone and welcome to Sherlock Tales. I'm thrilled to have you here for another long-form mystery. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Get comfortable, relax, and prepare for a classic Holmesian mystery unlike any other. The thick October mist clung to the rising slopes of Derbyshire like ancient wool, damp and immovable. My companion and I had been travelling north for several hours aboard the Midland Railway Express, our coach shuddering on iron rails that cut through a desolate, boggy landscape. Sherlock Holmes sat opposite me, utterly still, gazing out the fogged window with his long, pale fingers steepled under his chin. He had not spoken in nearly an hour, not since the train left the last discernible station behind. When I finally broke the silence, it was only to ask, "You've heard of this Lord Allendale before?" Holmes's eyes flicked to mine, glassy and distant. "Only in the context of geological societies and obscure donations to the British Museum," he said. "He's not the sort to make headlines." "Yet he sends you a telegram pleading for immediate assistance. Which tells us something quite valuable, Watson. Either he's mad, or frightened of something that can't be explained by any rational means." I sat back. "What's the trouble?" Holmes reached into his coat and retrieved a folded scrap of paper. It was yellowed and scrawled in an erratic hand. "Holmes, come at once. A disappearance, perhaps worse. The manor bells will not cease ringing, though all lines are cut. My son is gone. I cannot sleep. The servants whisper of demons in the chimneys. There are hoof prints where there should be none. I fear for my name and my life. Come. Allendale." I reread it thrice before replying. "Is it a joke?" "I thought so at first, but Lord Allendale is a retired judge, a man of facts, not fables. And the handwriting, Watson, see the tremor? That's no theatrical flourish. That's a man on the edge." Grange Hollow stood atop a wind-scoured moor several miles from the village of Ripley. It was an old manor, much older than it had any right to be, built atop a foundation rumoured to predate the Reformation. The carriage left us at the iron gate, unwilling to go farther. Our driver muttered something about the peal that won't end. Indeed, even from this distance we could hear it, a constant tolling, slow and deliberate, echoing from the bell tower that crowned the house. It was not a welcoming sound. It rang like a funeral dirge dragged through wet stone. Holmes paused to listen. "One bell," he said. "No modulation. Roughly 8-second intervals. It's maddening." "Intended to be." We approached the manor on foot. The front door was already ajar. Lord Allendale himself awaited us in the drawing-room. A tall, gaunt figure with a deep furrow between his brows, and the tremor of someone who had not slept properly in days. He was pale beneath his velvet dressing robe, and his eyes were sunken. "Mr. Holmes, thank the heavens," he said. "You received my telegram." "I did, and if it was your intention to intrigue me, you succeeded." Allendale gestured for us to sit. A butler, clearly nervous, brought us tea. It rattled in the cup. "Forgive me if I struggle for clarity," said Allendale. "I can barely think. The bells have not stopped in 72 hours. We've cut the lines, removed the hammer mechanism, even padlocked the clockwork drum, but it keeps ringing." "And your son?" "Jonathan, 24. He disappeared 3 nights ago, right before the bells began. One moment he was in the library reading. Next, he was gone. No sign, no struggle." "Police?" "They searched the grounds. Nothing. Only this." He produced a photograph, a patch of the manor's gravel path, and in its centre a perfectly preserved set of hoof prints. "Horse?" I asked. Allendale shook his head. "That path is covered by an archway. No horse could fit through. And there's only one pair of prints. No entry, no exit." Holmes leaned forward, tapping his lip. "Have you heard of a legend called the Red Bell of Gethsemane, Lord Allendale?" The man's face lost what colour remained. Yes, an old family story. A curse." "Good," said Holmes. "Then you may be ready for what we're about to uncover." We were given adjoining rooms on the second floor near the west wing. The bell continued to toll. Its sound vibrated through the walls like a heartbeat. That night I could not sleep. Neither could Holmes, who wandered the halls barefoot, lantern in hand, taking note of every groaning beam, every draughty corridor, every painting slightly askew. At some ungodly hour I found him in the chapel at the manor's rear. He was examining the bell rope, which lay coiled and severed on the floor. "There's no mechanism left," he said, voice low. "No rope. No hammer, yet the bell rings." "Then how?" I asked. Holmes looked up at the tower above. "There's something in that belfry, Watson, and I do not believe it's a man." We ascended the bell tower at dawn. The stairs groaned with each step, the wood blackened with age. Dust thick as snow lay atop everything. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and rust. Yet the bell tolled above us, steady, relentless. At the top, Holmes opened the hatch. The bell hung undisturbed. Its hammer lay broken on the floor. No one was inside. And yet... Tong! The bell rang. Holmes stared at it in silence. Then he pointed. There, etched into the base of the bell in Latin, "Veniet cum sanguine, audient omnes." "He shall come with blood, all shall hear." We left the tower in silence. That evening we questioned the servants. Several spoke of hearing hoofbeats in the hall at night. A maid swore she saw a figure in crimson standing atop the bell tower under the moonlight. A gardener found one of the hounds dead in the courtyard, its throat slit with surgical precision. And in the library, behind a false panel, Holmes discovered a locked metal box. Inside, an old will, parchment yellow and brittle. The seal bore the sigil of the Gethsemane Priory, dissolved in 1538 during Henry VIII's dissolution. The will was addressed to the last of the Allendale line. Its final line read, "When the bell tolls unbidden, the debt of blood must be repaid." Holmes looked at me and said, "This is no longer merely a case of disappearance, Watson. It is inheritance, and possibly murder." The storm broke just before midnight. Wind howled through the eaves and rain fell in sheets against the manor's thick, ancient windows. In the flickering candlelight of the drawing-room, Holmes stood with his arms folded, staring at the document we had uncovered, the will penned by a man who, by all rights, should have been dead 400 years. Allendale, though visibly shaken, maintained a veneer of legal skepticism. It must be a forgery. No document from the 16th century would be so well preserved. Holmes raised a brow. The parchment was stored in a hermetic tin within dry stone. I'd wager it's authentic. As for the handwriting, the curve of the G and the flourished A match that of the priory ledgers you showed me earlier, entries believed to be penned by Father Matthias of Gethsemane. Lord Allendale sat heavily. "You're telling me that this curse is legitimate?" "I do not believe in curses, my lord," Holmes replied, "but I do believe in consequences." We returned to the chapel at dawn. Holmes carried a lantern and his magnifying glass. I brought my revolver. The floor of the chapel was comprised of great flagstones worn by centuries of footsteps. Holmes studied the seam between two of the largest. "Here," he said, "the edges have been recently disturbed." He knelt and, with considerable effort, pried one up. Beneath it lay a hollow cavity, dry, musty, and black as pitch. A staircase descended into the earth. Cut stone, hand-chiselled, old, very old. Without hesitation, Holmes led the way. The stair led us into a vaulted crypt, supported by ribbed columns and lined with empty niches that might once have held tombs. The air was heavy with dust and the faint metallic sting of iron. Our footsteps echoed endlessly. It was clear that the crypt extended well beyond the original footprint of the manor, suggesting the priory had once been far larger than the Allendale estate. "This predates your family's title," Holmes whispered. He pointed to a faded fresco on the wall, red-robed figures tolling a bell over a chained man. "Redemption through resonance," read the inscription. In the centre of the chamber stood a stone altar, its top split and stained. Holmes brushed away the dust to reveal a sigil, a crowned hoof. We stared at it in silence. Holmes murmured, "The Bell of Gethsemane was no object. It was a ritual." At the far end of the crypt we found a second chamber, this one locked with an iron door recently reinforced. Holmes knelt to examine the keyhole. "Fresh scratches," he noted. "This has been opened." And not long ago. Inside we found Jonathan's journal. Lord Allendale's son, missing 3 nights. The final entries were rushed, erratic. I heard it again, the bell, but I wasn't near the tower. There was a voice in the wall, said the debt is mine. I saw it. The man with the face of a horse, standing at the end of the hall. Holmes closed the journal with a snap. This was not madness, this was induction. Someone, or something, has been preparing him. "Preparing him for what?" I asked. Holmes looked at the altar once more. "For sacrifice period." That evening Lord Allendale confirmed our suspicions. "There's a vault beneath the manor," he confessed. "Sealed off after the fire in 1811. My great-grandfather buried half the west wing." "Why?" Holmes asked. "To keep what was under it from escaping." "Then it wasn't the fire that destroyed the wing," Holmes said quietly. "It was what came out of that crypt." At Holmes's request, we descended into the ruins of the west wing. The air there was thick with soot and silence. Charred beams protruded like skeletal ribs from the floor. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, but Holmes manoeuvred with surety, scanning the walls, tapping with his cane. We found the vault hidden beneath a slab of scorched marble, and when we pried it open, the first thing we saw was a set of robes, blood red, wrapped around bones. Not animal bones, human. Dozens, arranged in a circle around a smaller bell, black, polished obsidian, etched with Latin, "He who hears may never silence it." Holmes lifted the bell by its wooden yoke. It was warm. "Watson," he said, "this is the source. The ringing you hear above, it begins here." "Then why does no one hear it when they come near?" Holmes turned the bell and showed me the interior. Inside was no clapper, only the desiccated remains of a human tongue. That night we questioned the manor's oldest servant, a mute woman named Beatrice, who had worked for the family since the Crimean War. Holmes communicated with her through a notebook. She wrote with shaky fingers, "The bell is not to call people. It is to keep something in." The next morning we discovered that Jonathan Allendale had returned, or so it seemed. One of the housemaids claimed to have seen him standing in the north corridor, barefoot, pale, watching silently through a stained glass window. Holmes and I searched the entire floor, and found only a trail of wet footprints leading into the sealed wing. "Open it," Holmes told Allendale. Reluctantly, the Lord complied. Inside, the air was cold as death. We followed the trail to the central hearth, where, in the ash, we found the word "redeemed" traced in soot. That night I was awoken by the bell, closer now, louder. I rushed to Holmes's room only to find it empty. A single candle burned on his desk, and a note, "Do not follow me. If I fail, burn the tongue." I ignored him, of course. Armed with my revolver and a lantern, I descended alone into the crypt. There, in the altar room, I found Holmes standing at the centre, facing the obsidian bell. His eyes were locked on it, unblinking. "The ritual is incomplete," he whispered. "What ritual?" I've pieced it together. They took the tongue from the last high priest to silence the bell, but a tongue that speaks truth can always ring again. "Holmes," I said carefully, "step away." But he didn't move. Then I heard it, from the darkness behind the altar, the slow, deliberate sound of hoofsteps. Holmes turned, so did I, and there it stood, a figure, tall, hunched, its head crowned with the skull of a stag, twisted and malformed, draped in red. Its eyes, if they were eyes, shimmered with wet, inhuman reflection, and in its right hand it held a second bell, silver, clean, unrung. Holmes whispered, "Watson, shoot the tongue." I turned, raised my revolver, fired. The tongue inside the bell burst into ash. The obsidian cracked, and the tolling stopped. Holmes collapsed. The creature vanished. Only silence remained. We ascended as the sun rose over Grange Hollow, and for the first time in 4 days, the air was clear. For the first time in a week, the manor was quiet. The bell's endless tolling had ceased. The servants moved about like dazed survivors of a siege. And yet, I could not feel relief. Holmes had not spoken since the events in the crypt. He sat in the library, silent, his gaze fixed on the hearth as if he expected something to emerge from the flames. When I pressed him, he merely said, "We did not stop the ringing, Watson. We only delayed it." On the second morning following the event, we were visited by a man in a damp oilskin coat and soot-smudged spectacles. He arrived unannounced, carrying a leather satchel and the confident gait of a man used to moving unseen. He introduced himself as Mr. Horace Blake, a bell engineer and horologist from Cambridge. "Apologies for the sudden arrival," he said, removing his gloves, "but I was informed by a certain archivist that the bell of Gethsemane had rung once again." Holmes's head lifted sharply. "Who told you that?" Mr. Blake smiled. "A mutual acquaintance, someone who still believes certain clocks should never tick again." He opened his satchel and pulled out a folio bound in iron clasps. Inside, blueprints. Holmes studied them silently for several minutes, then, "Where did you get this?" Blake replied calmly, "From the estate of Isaac Kincaid. You've heard of him, surely?" Holmes stiffened. I interjected, "Kincaid was a clockmaker to the royal family." "Yes," Holmes said slowly, "and a genius in mechanisms of harmonic containment." Blake nodded. "Indeed, this," he gestured to the blueprints, "is his final creation. a containment housing for the so-called resonant bell once kept in the priory at Gethsemane. It was never meant to ring again. Holmes frowned. Then who wanted it to? Blake hesitated, then quietly. Your client, Lord Allendale. Holmes immediately summoned the old man. Allendale arrived 20 minutes later, red-eyed and visibly anxious. Holmes wasted no time. Why did you open the vault, Lord Allendale? The Lord stared. I did no such thing. You removed the padlocks. You breached the altar seal. You lit the way. Why? Allendale collapsed into a chair. His voice was hoarse. I didn't want to believe it. But Jonathan, he found something in the family archives. A letter from 1807. It spoke of the inheritance of voices. It claimed that our bloodline was not merely noble, but anointed, as keepers of the bell that binds. He believed we were meant to restore it, to awaken it. Holmes's eyes narrowed. He sought the ritual. Yes, said Allendale, and I helped him. Blake confirmed the worst. The bell was designed to operate on psychoacoustic principles, vibrations not just of sound, but of perception. To hear it is to bind yourself to it. He looked at Holmes. You've heard it, haven't you? Holmes said nothing. His silence was answer enough. The days that followed were unnerving. Though the bell had fallen silent, strange things persisted in the house. Mirrors warped briefly as we passed them. Candles burned in patterns, 3 short flames, then 1 tall. Footsteps echoed where none walked. A maid claimed to hear whispering in her ear whenever she passed the chapel door. And Holmes, he began sleepwalking. Twice I found him standing at the threshold of the ruined wing, eyes open, mouth moving soundlessly. The 3rd time he was holding a bell. It was not the obsidian one. This was smaller, made of ivory and bone, strung with what appeared to be strands of black hair. When I approached, Holmes turned and handed it to me without a word. He seemed unaware of how it had come into his possession. Blake examined it under lamplight. This is pre-Kincaid, he whispered. Primitive, a prototype, perhaps one of the early keys. Keys to what? I asked. Holmes answered for him. To open the minds of those who hear. That night, Holmes disappeared. I found his room empty, his bed unslept in. A single phrase was scrawled on the mirror in chalk. The time has come to toll backward. Panic set in. I alerted the staff. Searched the manor top to bottom. Checked the chapel, the crypt, the tower. Nothing. It was Beatrice, the mute maid, who led me to the attic. There, in the dust and shadows, I found Holmes kneeling before an ancient cabinet clock. Its case had been shattered open, the pendulum removed. Inside, the mechanism had been replaced with a series of rotating chimes. Each one bore a name, mine among them, Holmes was whispering. They are winding us, Watson. We are part of the clock. With Blake's help, I pulled him from the attic and brought him to his senses. He was pale, fevered, and weak. I'm inside it, he kept repeating. Every tick, another thought not my own. We locked the bone bell in the strongbox with the obsidian one and buried it deep in the moor behind the chapel. Holmes began recovering, but I feared something had taken root. 2 nights later, Blake was found dead. Slumped over his notes, eyes wide, heart stopped. But there was no sign of struggle, no wound, only a single word written on the last page of his notebook. Echo. And beside him, the bone bell, returned, untouched, undisturbed. Holmes did not speak for a full day. When he did, he simply said, We did not destroy the bell's power, Watson. We fed it. We burned both bells that night. Holmes stood over the fire, watching as bone cracked and obsidian split. They screamed as they burned, not in sound but in feeling. The manor grew darker that evening, as though something had departed, or something had arrived, and in the hall just past midnight, the bell rang. Once, the single ring of the bell echoed through the halls like a cold exhale from beneath the earth. Though no one else in the manor seemed to react, Holmes and I turned to one another at once, neither of us needing to speak to know the truth. The bell had survived the fire, or worse, it had never truly needed to exist in the first place. Holmes's face was pale as milk. "I destroyed the object," he whispered, "but I did not destroy the sound." We convened again in the library, where Lord Allendale sat nursing a glass of brandy, his fingers shaking as they traced the lip of the glass. "You heard it too," he said quietly. "Yes," Holmes replied, "and that means it's not localized." Localized? An echo, residual or recursive, like a message played backward in a phonograph record, or the ripple left in a bell jar after the clapper is removed. I feared this might happen. I sat down slowly. "You knew it could continue?" Holmes nodded. "If the bell is not merely physical but symbolic, if it is a ritual of attention rather than vibration, then its sound may persist as a function of memory, not mechanics." I blinked. "You're saying we are still hearing it because we remember it?" "I'm saying that by witnessing it, we may have entered into its resonance, like names inscribed in an echo." 2 hours later, the mirror in the guest hallway shattered spontaneously. No draft, no movement. Just a clear, high crack as though a single high note had been struck through crystal. The crack pattern? A perfect circle. We examined the shards. Holmes noted that the fracture lines all converged at a central point, forming a crude sigil, one he recognized. "It's the seal of Gethsemane," he murmured. "I thought you said it was just a myth." I said I didn't believe in curses, not that they weren't engineered. That night, we took the sealed tin containing Jonathan's journal and returned to the crypt once more, retracing every step of our previous descent. But something had changed. The air no longer smelled of dust or damp. Instead, it carried the faint, acrid scent of ink, old parchment, heated wax, and scorched vellum. And on the altar where the bell had once stood, we now found a new object. A tongue. Fresh, wet, laid reverently across a sheet of folded vellum sealed in red wax. Holmes bent over it, his face tight. "Ignore the spectacle," he said. "Focus on the letter." He cracked the seal. Inside, a message. Typeset, no handwriting. "If silence was the price, you paid it too late. The air was never yours to unwrite. The toll is due. The ink is flesh. The echo lives." No signature, no date. Holmes crumpled it without a word. We sealed the altar chamber behind us with stone and iron, Holmes muttering something in Latin under his breath. When we returned to the manor, Beatrice, the mute servant, waited in the foyer. She looked unusually disturbed. In her hands she held a folded kerchief. Inside, a human tooth, a molar, with a tiny bell-shaped symbol engraved on the root. Holmes took it with a gloved hand and said very softly, "They are building the bell again." We consulted the family archives. There, among pages of feudal deeds and priory inventories, we discovered a document labelled only "The Third Toll." Its contents were chilling. According to the record, there had been 3 historical ringings of the Bell of Gethsemane. The first in 1431, coinciding with the Black Church fires. The second in 1794, during the madness of the Allendale House fire. And the third, Holmes frowned. It's blank. No, I said, pointing. The date space, it's missing, not blank. Indeed, it was torn out, surgically. Holmes traced the edge. They don't record the third tolling, he said. They live it. That night, Holmes gave me a curious instruction. If I am ever absent for more than one night, go to the west wing's fireplace. Pull the third brick from the left. Take whatever is there, and leave the manor. I nodded uneasily. And you? I will remain, he said, until the fourth toll. What if there is no fourth? There always is, he replied. The bell rings in threes, but the fourth is not a toll, it is a silence. The following evening, Holmes vanished again. This time I obeyed his instructions. At the hearth in the west wing I found the third brick and removed it. Behind it, a rolled parchment, a confession, penned not by Holmes, but by Jonathan Allendale. It was not addressed to his father, but to the Red Keeper. I heard it as a child before they silenced it. The bell called to me through sleep. It promised I could unlock my voice, my worth, my inheritance. I found the ritual in the Priory's Apocrypha. I stole the priest's key. I bled the dog beneath the altar. I called the figure in red. He answered. I gave him the tongue, mine. I dropped the parchment in horror. Holmes had been right. The bell did not toll at Jonathan. It tolled through him. At midnight I heard the bell again. Not distant, not above. It rang inside me. Just once. Enough to freeze my lungs, to tear at my mind. Holmes burst through my door seconds later, face drenched in sweat, his hands shaking. It's begun, he said. The fourth toll. But you said there was no fourth. Not for the world, for us, for the listeners. And then, to my confusion, he handed me a blindfold. We're going back into the crypt, but not with eyes. Blindfolded, we descended, step after step into the cold. Holmes guided me with whispered instructions. One step left, now down. Good. Do not speak when we arrive. Only listen. When we reached the altar chamber, I felt the air change, heavier, damp, as though laced with ink and breath. I heard a sound, not a bell, not words, a voice, not spoken aloud, but pressed directly into the mind. And then a phrase I will never forget. Speak and be unmade. Listen and be remembered. Holmes removed my blindfold. The altar was empty, the tongue was gone, and etched into the stone floor freshly gouged. It is not the bell that binds, it is the ear. We returned to the manor at dawn. Neither of us spoke for several hours. At noon, Holmes lit every fire in the house. Then he turned to me and said, "They know we understand." I stared at him. "Then what now?" He looked toward the bell tower and said, "We build our own toll, one they cannot overwrite." Holmes was already at work when I awoke. The dining table was covered in sketches, vellum pages, small brass gears, copper coils, and a single tuning fork placed atop a dusty Bible. He did not greet me. His eyes were alight with something perilously close to obsession. "You said we'd build our own toll," I said, carefully. "What does that mean?" Holmes looked up, his voice low and steady. "I have no interest in banishing the bell, Watson. Only in answering it." That chilled me. "You wish to respond?" He gave a slight nod. If the bell's toll is a question, a summoning, then it must be possible to construct a counter-resonance, not unlike how a violin string can be silenced by its harmonic opposite. I looked at the tuning fork. And if you're wrong? His eyes held mine. Then it hears me. That morning, Holmes met with Beatrice once more. Though she remained mute, she produced from her apron a bundle wrapped in wool cloth. Inside, an ancient wooden recorder, cracked and blackened by age. She says it belonged to her brother, Holmes translated, reading her notes. He played it during the last tolling. He didn't survive. I swallowed. Then why bring it now? Beatrice wrote one final word. Balance. Holmes took the instrument and held it to his ear. Not to play it, but to listen. He nodded once. The bell has a counterpart, he said. In the week that followed, Holmes built a device unlike any I had seen. He called it the negative resonator, a hand-sized chamber lined with gut string, ivory and mirror-finished copper. It resembled a lantern at first glance, but its interior housed a coiled filament suspended between twin tuning forks, one forged from silver, the other iron. It won't emit a sound, he said, not in the way we expect. It will nullify the bell's imprint on the mind, not just the air. But if the bell rings again, it will, Holmes said simply. We must be ready. Meanwhile, Lord Allendale grew worse. He began muttering at shadows in the corridor, claimed he could see letters floating in the candle flames, insisted that Jonathan stood just beyond the mirror's edge, waiting to be read aloud. Worse still, the bells returned. Faint at first, then stronger. Not the same tone as before. Lower, hungrier, and always without source. No bell, no tower. Just the sound inside you. Holmes activated the resonator. It pulsed once, cool air sweeping outward like a sigh through a cathedral. The toll stopped, but only for a moment. Then, tong. Not one bell this time, two. They're harmonizing, Holmes whispered. Building a chord. I stared at him. Is that even possible? If they are memories given structure, he said, then yes, it is all possible. That night I dreamed of Jonathan. He stood at the altar in the crypt, a book held open, his mouth sewn shut. The bells tolled not from his lips, but from his chest, ribs vibrating like strings. He opened the book to me. Inside, the names of every person I had ever known, then mine, then a blank space, and one word beneath it, a waiting tone. I woke screaming. Holmes stood at the foot of my bed, fully dressed, eyes hollow. I've deciphered the glyphs, he said. Glyphs? In the bell tower, behind the frescoes. He led me there before dawn. Using a chisel and lamp, he uncovered an older layer of stone, beneath which lay a circle of etched characters, not Latin, not English, but mathematical. Each sigil was a ratio point, frequencies. When arranged in sequence, they formed a pattern. Holmes copied them, then placed the resonator inside the circle. He activated it. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then the candle beside us went out, inward, as if the flame had been inhaled. The tower groaned. And then a figure appeared. It was not fully visible, only the suggestion of limbs, an outline, draped in red, wearing a headpiece shaped like an open bell. The air around it shimmered. Holmes did not flinch. "Speak," he said. The figure tilted its head. Then, in a voice like rust scraping glass, "You have heard, you have answered. Now "You will be remembered." And then it was gone. The tower door slammed shut behind us. When we finally pried it open, the world beyond had changed. All clocks in the manor had stopped. All fires had gone out. And in every mirror our reflections lagged by half a second. Holmes stood still. "The bell has acknowledged us," he said. "It knows we can ring back." We checked the crypt. The altar was gone. In its place, a perfect mirror, framed in blackened gold, and on it, scrawled in soot, "The tongue listens now." Holmes made a decision. We end this. He instructed me to prepare 2 things. 1. A carriage to the Ashbourne Asylum, where a former curate of Gethsemane had, reportedly, been committed in 1833. Cases, hollowed out and lined with silver. "I intend to trap the tone," Holmes said. "How?" "By letting it speak." Before we left, Holmes did something I had never seen him do. He wrote a will. Not for wealth, not for possessions, just one clause. "If I am silenced, let the recording speak for me. The bell will toll, but it will also confess." We departed for Ashbourne at sunrise. The air behind us was still, but I swear, as the carriage rolled down the lane, I heard it once more. Tong! Faint, not from the tower, not from the earth, but from Holmes himself. The Ashbourne Asylum stood on a ridge outside the village, wrapped in mist and surrounded by crumbling ash trees. It had not taken in new patients for more than 2 decades, yet Holmes had secured our visit through correspondence with a retired caretaker, Mr. Elridge, who now lived in a cottage nearby. "I remember the man you're looking for," Elridge said as we approached the rusted gates. "Reverend Edric Vale. They put him in room 41. "When was that?" Holmes asked. 1833. "Then surely—" "He was never removed," said Elridge darkly. "Some say he never aged. Some say he never spoke. But I heard him once." Elridge tapped his ear. He didn't scream. He didn't whisper. He tuned period. We entered the asylum through the rear, where a side entrance led us through long abandoned corridors, still smelling faintly of chalk, vinegar and sickness. The walls were cracked. Doors hung open to rooms filled with overturned beds and collapsed shelves. Only one door was sealed. Room 41, steel reinforced. Holmes examined it. 3 locks, 2 external, 1 internal dot. He held up the 3rd key, which Elridge had retrieved from beneath a floorboard in the chapel. "I want you to stand back, Watson." "Are we letting him out?" "No," Holmes said quietly. "We're letting it speak." Inside was a bare chamber, lit only by a shaft of light from a slit in the upper wall. The man, if he could still be called such, sat in the corner, cross-legged, facing the wall. His skin was yellowed, paper-thin. His beard trailed like brittle moss across his chest, but his eyes were wide open and moving, flicking from side to side as if scanning an invisible ledger. Holmes stepped in, held up the phonograph cylinder, and spoke a single word. "Bell." The old man did not respond. Holmes placed the phonograph on the floor and wound it. The needle dropped. The chamber filled with silence. Then a tone emerged, not from the device, not from Holmes, from Vale. His chest vibrated, his jaw unhinged slightly, and from his lips came not words but frequencies, rising, falling, like a lullaby in reverse. Holmes leaned close. "Speak the name of the 4th. And then Vale turned. For the first time in 92 years he turned, then whispered, Your name was added when you listened. Holmes froze. Whose name? Yours, Vale rasped. And his. He looked at me. We left the room in silence. Holmes said nothing for a long time. Only when we reached the carriage did he finally speak. They've bound us, Watson, through attention, through witnessing period. What can we do? Rewrite the tone. We returned to the manor that evening. Beatrice was waiting at the gate, her apron stained with ink. She handed Holmes a page, a musical score, but not of melody. Of intervals, he studied it and whispered the counter-resonance. That night, Holmes worked in the library for 12 straight hours. He wrote, scratched out, rewrote again. He constructed a second resonator, this one shaped like a narrow bell but hollow with a silver tongue forged from the stylus of the phonograph. This, he said, is the silent bell. I stared. It rings nothing. It rings removal. It will erase us from their score. We descended into the crypt one final time. The mirror was still there, still bearing the phrase, "The tongue listens now." Holmes placed the silent bell before it, then stepped into the circle drawn from salt and ash. "Once I ring it," he said, "I may not remember you." I stepped forward. "Then don't ring it." "I must," Holmes replied. "The echo cannot be silenced, but it can be reversed if enough of us refuse to speak it further." He took a breath, lifted the silent bell, and let it fall. No sound, only a rush of heat like blood behind the eyes, and then stillness. Holmes fell. I caught him. He looked up at me and said, What is your name?" I choked. "You know me." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I remember the sound of something, but not you." And then he slept. For 3 days Holmes did not rise. He breathed, he ate, but he said nothing. I wrote to Mycroft, who sent men from the Crown to inspect the manor. The crypt had collapsed. The mirror was gone. Only ash remained, and in it, one final word, noted. On the 4th morning, Holmes awoke. He looked out the window. "Where are we?" he asked. "Derbyshire," I said. "Grange Hollow." "The bell?" he asked. "Silent." He nodded slowly and then said, "Let's go home, Watson." We left that day. As we rolled away in the carriage, I dared one final glance back. The manor was still. No shadow moved in the windows. No bell tolled in the tower. Only the faint hum of the wheels on the stone path. But just before the ridge dipped out of view, I swear I saw a figure in the highest window, red, watching. We returned to Baker Street in grim quiet. Holmes spoke little, though his gaze lingered longer on certain sounds, the ticking of our hallway clock, the creak of the stair, the ring of a spoon against porcelain. These ordinary notes, previously unnoticed, now seemed to hold meaning. After several days he resumed reading, then writing. He did not resume violin. "I no longer trust the strings," he told me, half in jest, but I suspected otherwise. 2 weeks after our return, a small brown envelope arrived. No name, no return address. Inside, a torn page from a hymnal. Holmes frowned. "The lyric of Gethsemane," he muttered. "This isn't supposed to exist anymore." The verse. 3 tolls, 3 times, for blood, for word, for will. The 4th shall fall to silence still, but silence tolls where none can see, in minds that hum eternally. At the bottom of the page, scrawled in ink, were 5 names. One of them was mine. Holmes took the page and placed it atop a growing dossier he'd been compiling. Photographs of bells across the continent, old monastery maps, testimonies of the deaf who claim to hear words in the dark. Gethsemane is not a place, he said. It is a structure of attention, a method. The priory was only one node. The others are waking. You believe it's spreading? He nodded. Through stories, through memory. Every time someone recounts what they heard, even if the bell no longer physically tolls, they bring it one step closer to return. I exhaled. So, what do we do? Holmes looked at the names again, and said, we gather the others. The names led us to 4 people. Honora Shaw, a music teacher in Bath, deaf since birth, but recently able to feel rhythms in her sleep. Ezra Mull, a gravekeeper in Essex who recorded tones emanating from beneath the earth using a handmade seismograph. Margot Penley, a linguist who claimed her dead brother had been sending her phonemes in dreams, and Inspector Garvin, retired, who'd once worked a case in Grange Hollow, but refused to speak of it. His tongue, we later learned, had been voluntarily removed. Each of them shared one thing in common. They had heard the bell without sound. We brought them to a secluded estate Mycroft arranged near the cliffs of Dover. Holmes called it Resonance Zero. The purpose? Not to silence the bell again, but to overwrite it. He called it the counter-chant. Every night the 5 sat in a circle, each with a recording device. Holmes played tones, some from tuning forks, others from natural sounds slowed and reversed. Ocean waves, birdsong, violin notes. He instructed them not to repeat what they heard, but to respond in rhythm. Some beat their hands on the table, others hummed low tones. Honora signed in patterns, fluid, beautiful sequences of motion. Garvin tapped his cane to mark the half notes. The sounds never aligned, until the 7th night. At 3:12 a.m., a perfect harmonic emerged, unplanned, unwritten, a tone that did not come from any of them, but seemed to rise between them. The tape recorder captured it. Holmes replayed the moment over and over, and with each playback, the room itself grew quieter, more whole. Their response has form, he whispered. The echo has its inverse. He called it the unbell. But as we prepared to publish our findings in code, never directly referencing the bell, Holmes received a letter. It bore a wax seal in the shape of a tongue. Inside, only a page. No words, only a list. And at the top, dead names. All 5 participants were listed. Beneath them, ours, mine, his. Holmes folded the letter and said very calmly, "The bell has heard us back." That night, Honora Shaw died. In her sleep, her mouth open, and around her pillow, scorched wax. Garvin followed 2 days later, his final act scrawling "Listen no more" on the walls of his chamber in blood. The others fled. Only we remained. Holmes locked the doors and resumed work. 1 week later, Holmes disappeared for the 3rd and final time. He left no note, no trace. Only his coat, folded neatly on the chair beside the fireplace. Inside the pocket, the phonograph cylinder from Ashbourne. I played it. I heard nothing. Then everything. A tone, not loud, but clear, as though vibrating behind my own skull, and Holmes's voice whispering, "Watson, if you hear this, I am not dead. I am resonant. Do not mourn. Do not follow. Do not ring." I buried the cylinder. I sealed the notes. I vowed never to speak of the Bell of Gethsemane again, but I lied, because now I am speaking it. And by listening, you have heard it too. Weeks passed. Baker Street stood quiet. No new cases, no Holmes, no music. The streets below were louder than ever. Trams clattering, voices raised. But I heard it all through a layer of cloth, as if the world had been dampened. And sometimes, just below the hiss of the city, I heard the bell again. Not in my ears, in my teeth, in my blood. I tried to forget. But forgetting is impossible when the memory is not yours to keep. One morning I found a package on the doorstep, no address, wrapped in brown waxed paper, bound with twine. Inside, a single scorched manuscript. No title on the cover. Only an embossed sigil, an open bell flanked by eyes. Holmes's sigil. I opened the first page. To those who listen unwillingly, know that I wrote this not in ink but in frequency. This manuscript should never exist in form. If you are reading it, then I failed in silence. And now I must finish the toll. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sherlock Holmes. The rest of the manuscript was unlike any document I had ever read. Paragraphs written in spiral patterns, lines of Latin intersecting mathematical notation, chapters that began and ended in mid-sentence, only to continue on earlier pages. At first it made no sense, but as I progressed, slowly, methodically, I began to understand. It was not a story. It was a tuning fork, a resonant structure disguised as a manuscript. Each word chosen not just for meaning, but for vibrational impact. The page was not telling me what Holmes had seen. It was making me remember it. In Chapter 4, I read of a room with no doors, only a chair, a metronome ticking backward, and a mirror into which Holmes had stared for 4 hours straight, watching the reflection of something behind him, something that never moved. Until he blinked. In Chapter 7 he described learning the name of the bell, not its shape, not its tone, its name. He never wrote it, only said, "To name it is to ring it. To ring it is to let it feed. I will not give it my voice." The final page was blank, except for one instruction handwritten sideways. "Stand where we burned it. Midnight alone. Bring no steel. Leave your name at home." I knew the place, the moor behind the chapel, where we buried the bells, where the ash still blackened the roots. I left Baker Street that evening. I took nothing but my coat and a notebook. No steel, no name, only resolve. The moor was colder than I remembered. The wind rang through the grasses like strings on a harp. I stepped into the blackened circle, waited. The wind stopped. So did my heartbeat. And then, from the darkness, a voice. Watson. It was his voice, but not from ahead, not from behind, from within me. You kept listening, even when I told you not to. That means you are ready. A shape emerged. Not Holmes, but like him, faceless, outlined in red thread. And when it spoke, I realized the truth. "We are the bell, John. We always were. Every word, every syllable you wrote summoned us. Now let us toll." The ground shook, but not from impact. From remembrance the bell rang. Tong. But no sound reached the air. Only memory. I saw my childhood. I saw my father's death. I saw Holmes holding a lantern in the crypt. And then I saw Holmes as a boy, hearing the bell, crying, marking the floor with chalk symbols. He had known all along. The faceless shape reached toward me. Add your name and we toll forever. Resist and we toll alone. I stepped back, shaking. Where is Holmes? I asked. You already know. No, I whispered. And then behind the shape, Star, he appeared. Holmes' eyes sunken, but smiling. Watson, he said, I was wrong. I ran forward, but he raised a hand. You mustn't touch me. I'm not here. Then where? In the tone, he said softly, between words, between your blinks. He reached into his coat, pulled out something small, a final bell. But this one was white. Bone, yes, but carved with our initials. SH and JHW. This is the bell that ends it, he said, because it remembers only us, not the priory, not the altar, just a friendship, a bond. He pressed it into my hands. Ring it once and forget me. Twice, and remember only the man, not the sound. 3 times he faltered. And you become me. He vanished. The faceless shape recoiled, screamed without sound, and fled into the grass, unravelling as it went, threads of red vanishing into the mist. I stood alone, the bell in hand. I rang it once. The world grew quiet. The moor turned to silver, and I walked away. Not home, not back, but forward, with silence behind me, and only faint memory ahead. After ringing the bell, once something changed. Not in the air, not in the world, in me. When I returned to London, the city no longer seemed to recognise me. Street lamps flickered as I passed. Dogs barked only once and fell silent. A boy at the corner where I always bought my newspaper stared blankly when I greeted him. "Do I know you?" he asked. I did not answer, because I was no longer sure. I went back to Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson greeted me cheerfully, then paused. "You look different, Doctor. Been on holiday?" I had left only 3 days earlier, but when I entered my study, I found my own handwriting in the journal. Entries I had not written, describing dreams I had never had, places I had never visited, and at the bottom of one page, dated 6 months before, Holmes is gone, the bell is gone, but the tone remains in me. I flipped back through earlier pages, dates out of order, ink fresh, and it made no sense. I checked the mirror, and for a moment I did not reflect. That night I awoke to a voice outside my bedroom door. "Doctor." It was soft, low, female. "Doctor, may I come in?" I rose, opened the door. No one there, only a paper underfoot. One of Holmes's old cipher slips. I decoded it by candlelight. It read, "Do not let her speak your name. She is the archivist. She writes people into the bell." I stayed up all night, knife in hand, watching the windows. At 3:14 a.m., I saw her, standing across the street, dressed like a nun, face hidden, hands gloved. She held a book, bound in red. She never moved, not for hours. When I blinked, she was gone. Holmes had written of her once, very briefly. There is a chronicler for the bell, not a priest, not a woman, a function dot. She records those who hear and those who toll. Her only weapon is the name. If she speaks it, you become echo. I packed my things, left Baker Street. I burned every page of the manuscript Holmes had sent. But one thing remained. The white bell, bone and initials. I kept it in a box beneath my coat. Never rang it again. Never dared. Instead, I followed the only lead I had left, a name Holmes had once underlined in a registry of colonial shrines. Hulda March, a scholar of auditory faiths, said to have gone deaf after studying a crypt in Prague, where monks reportedly spoke through silence. I found him in a sanitarium outside Canterbury. He was blind, mute, and shackled to a chair, but when I said one word, "Gethsemane," he began to hum, and on his chest, beneath his shirt, tattooed across his sternum, "Do not speak him." I tried to show him the white bell. He recoiled violently, then began tapping his fingers, repeating sequences. 1, 3, 1, 2, 5. Holmes's code. I recognized it immediately. It spelled, "Your voice is not yours. Do not trust memory. If you ring twice, you will become me." I ran. Outside, I stared at the bell. Bone, small, harmless. But I knew its weight now, and its function. It was not a tool to protect. It was a tool to transfer. Holmes had given me his echo, and I had rung it. Even once was too much. I was tuning now. I sought solitude, an old cabin Holmes once used near Dartmoor. There I burned everything, my journals, photographs, clothes. I scoured my notebooks for one final trace of Holmes's intentions. On the last blank page I found a line I do not remember writing, but it was in my hand. "The echo is not in the bell. It is in the telling." And beneath that, "If you are reading this, then you have already heard it." I wept, not for fear, but because I finally understood. Holmes had not vanished. He had written himself out, removed his name from the bell's book by becoming story, not man. He gave me the chance to do the same, but only once. So now I sit, and I write, but not for fame, not for answer, for unmaking. Every word I record here is a slow toll back into silence. This is my counter-echo, my final note, and soon I will ring the bell again. Once for forgetting, twice for the man, never a third, because then I will not be Watson. I will be only Tone. I have delayed writing this for as long as I dared. Each day the bell grows quieter, not because it fades, but because I no longer need sound to hear it. It lives now beneath my thoughts, in the syllables I speak, in the spaces between my words. Sometimes I forget mid-sentence what I was saying. Sometimes I forget my name. And once, just once, I forgot Holmes. Not the cases, not the man, just the tone of his voice, and I knew then. I was no longer a listener. I was becoming a chime. So I returned one last time to the moors, to Grange Hollow. The manor was gone, swallowed by ivy and collapsed walls. Only the bell tower remained, crumbling, hollow and silent. I climbed it slowly, each step heavier than the last, as though gravity itself resisted remembrance. At the top, I found what I both feared and expected. A final inscription on the inside of the bell casing. The story is the toll. The end is the listener. I took out the white bell, the one Holmes gave me. It was cold now, heavier than before, as though full of what we had never spoken. I looked out across the moor and raised it. One last time. Tong. And the world did not vanish. It did not shift. It listened. In that moment, I understood something Holmes never said aloud. The bell of Gethsemane was never about death or memory or madness. It was about consent. The moment you acknowledge it, you give it form, not by belief, but by retelling. Every case file, every whisper, every time I remembered him. I rang it again. We all did. But now I am the last. The archivist is gone. The chroniclers are buried. Only I remain, not as a voice, but as a vessel. This record is not a confession. It is a seal. You who read this, you now hear it too, but you may yet be spared. So I give you this choice. Do not share this. Do not repeat it. Let this story end here, and you may yet remain only a reader, not a witness. Not a chime, not a toll. But if you speak it aloud, if you pass it on, then the bell will ring once more, and Holmes, my Holmes, will live again. Not as a man, but as a tone. For what is a great detective if not the echo that refuses to be silenced? What is memory if not the fourth toll? And what are we but bells waiting to be rung,